Hello students, welcome to BYJU'S IAS. Welcome to the segment on Explained. In this particular video, we'll have a discussion related to the very recently announced MSME debt recast by the central government. Now, before looking at these particular points, let's try and understand what is the importance of MSME sector in terms of the Indian economy. MSME basically stands for micro, small and medium enterprises. The importance of this particular sector is one, there are more than 65 million units which are functioning in case of India, and these 65 million units have got more than 130 million employment or number of people working in this particular sector. Again, some of the surveys put it around 120 million, some surveys put it around 130 million, but nevertheless very high number of people are working in this particular sector. Apart from this, it generates more than 40% of the productivity in the manufacturing sector, and it also contributes to more than 2/5 of the total Indian exports. And overall, to the India's GDP, the contribution from the MSME sector is around 8%. So these are some of the numbers or facts which basically indicate that MSME sector is very important from the viewpoint of Indian economy. Let's look at some of the issues which are plaguing this particular sector. I will not be discussing all the issues in detail. If you want to know all the issues in detail which are plaguing the MSME sector, please go through another video which is on MSME sector. But in this particular video, let's have a very quick view of what are the issues which are plaguing the MSME sector. One issue is the credit availability. The demand for credit from the perspective of MSME sector is very high, but the supply of credit, especially from the banking sector, is very less compared to the demand. That has been one of the very important issues which is plaguing this particular sector. Apart from this, there is also issue of non-performing assets. Very high number of loans which have been given to the MSME sector have become the NPAs over a period of time. This is another issue. Third and very important issue which has led to this particular debt recast is the impact of the two reforms introduced by the present government. That is the reform of demonetization as well as the reform of GST. Both of these reforms were implemented one after the other, and there is no denying the fact that these two reforms disrupted the supply chain management in case of the MSME sector. Even today, the MSME sector is yet to come out of the effect of these particular reforms. Apart from this, there are various other issues which are plaguing the MSME sector. But please understand this, because of these disruptions which were caused in the MSME sector, the government of India from the last couple of months has been demanding that there has to be a debt recast for this particular MSME sector. Now, what is the present mechanism if there is a non-performing asset or if there is an asset which is non-performing in the MSME sector? What is the present mechanism which is followed? As per the guidelines which have been issued by RBI, the present mechanism will be like this. Let's assume a particular MSME unit, let's say X, has borrowed loan from bank B. If the repayments have been happening on the timely basis, this particular asset or a loan will be referred as a standard asset. If the repayments do not happen for a period of, let's say, 90 days, then this particular account will be classified as non-performing asset. And once this particular account is classified as a non-performing asset, bank will have to basically drag this particular company or a unit to the NCLT, that is National Company Law Tribunal, and the process of IBC will be conducted. But please understand, before this particular account converts or is classified as NPA, there is a particular process which is followed. That is a basic concept of SMEs, special mention accounts. Now, if this particular unit X doesn't repay the loan for a period of up to 30 days, then this particular account will be classified as special mention account 0. If the repayment is due for more than 30 days but up to 60 days, then this account will be referred to as a SMA 1. And if the repayment is due for more than 60 days but up to 90 days, then this will be referred as SMA 2. This is a classification of a special mention account. These particular guidelines were issued by RBI to the banks to classify the loans which have been given to MSME sector of a value up to 25 crore rupees. and this is a present mechanism which is followed by all the banks in terms of the loans that they are given to MSME sector. Now, please understand this. If there is a present mechanism, what was the need for this particular debt announcement or debt recast announcement? The reasons why the debt recast was needed was, one, as already mentioned, the MSME sector has been disrupted by the demonetization as well as the implementation of a GST exercise. Second, as already mentioned, the non-performing assets in the MSME sector have kept on increasing. Very recently, this has been even mentioned by Financial Stability Report of RBI, which basically says that this particular trend of increase in the NPAs from the MSME sector, especially in the public sector banks, is a worrying trend. Why I am referring to public sector banks? One, public sector banks account for more than 70% of the credit market in case of India, and second, majority of the loans which are given from the banking sector to the MSME sector is from the public sector banks itself. And third, the NPAs in the public sector banks are very high, especially of the loans which are given to MSME, whereas in case of the private sector banks as well as the foreign banks, this particular NPAs ratio is very less. So that is the reason the Financial Stability Report basically says that this particular trend of increase in the NPAs of the loans which are given to MSME sector from the PSBs is a worrying trend. The third reason is that MSMEs account for a huge amount of loans which are given by the banking sector. That is, it is estimated that around 25% of the total credit issued by the banking sector has basically gone to the MSME units, which basically turns out to be around 23 trillion rupees. And finally, the fourth reason why this particular debt recast is needed is because RBI last year, that is in the year 2018, basically withdrew all the debt recast measures which were implemented by RBI itself in the preceding years. For example, the corporate debt restructuring has been withdrawn, the strategic debt restructuring has been withdrawn, 5:25 has been withdrawn. The RBI basically stated that with implementation of IBC, there will be further no more need of these particular debt recast schemes. So these are the four reasons why there was a need of a debt recast for the MSME sector. Now, very important, what has been announced under this particular debt recast model. Now, I'll discuss this under various important points. First, the debt recast will be only applicable if the total exposure of the institutions in the form of lending to this particular MSME is up to 25 crore rupees. I'll explain this. For example, there have been 3 banks or 3 financial institutions which have lent to a particular MSME unit, let's say AX. The total lending or the total exposure of credit from all these financial institutions which have given loan to this MSME unit should not be more than 25 crore rupees. This is the first very important point in terms of this particular debt recast announcement. Second, this particular unit X should be registered under GST. That is very important. But having said so, please remember this. If this particular unit has been given an exemption by the GST Council, wherein, let's say, the exemption in terms of the threshold limit. What if the threshold or the sales turnover of this particular unit X is a 10 lakh rupees? Since it is lesser than the threshold limit of 20 lakh rupees, there is no compulsion on this particular unit X to be registered under GST. This is as per the GST guidelines. Now, this particular unit X has taken loan. Will it be provided a debt recast under this particular model? Definitely yes, because please understand, though the guidelines say that it has to be registered under GST, the exemption will be given to all those units which need not compulsorily get registered under GST. Third, this particular account or the loan should be classified as a standard loan or a standard asset. As already mentioned, if the repayment doesn't happen for a period of 90 days, this particular account will be classified as a non-performing asset. Now, the guidelines basically say that if it is under default, that is, the owner has not repaid the loan or a EMI, but still the classification of this particular account is standard asset itself, then this will be eligible for the debt recast under this particular program. Fourth, this particular debt recast has to be implemented by the end of 31st March 2020. Fifth, a further extra provisioning of 5% has to be provided. Now let's try and understand this particular idea for provisioning. Now usually I've mentioned that an asset, that is a loan account, will be classified as either a standard asset or a non-performing asset. Again, within non-performing asset there are various types of the classifications. For example, there is a classification of substandard asset, doubtful asset, as well as a loss-making asset. But please understand, as per the accounting standards, whenever the bank has given a loan, it has to start making provisions. What do you mean by provisions? Let's assume here is a bank B which has given loan to person X. Now, whenever this kind of a loan is given, the bank is taking a risk, which is usually referred as a credit risk. What if this particular person X doesn't repay the loan? The bank B will have to suffer losses. Now, basically under the accounting standards, bank B has to make certain provisions to absorb these kind of losses in the future. Let's say hypothetically, bank B earns 100 rupees in terms of profits. If the provisioning norm says that 10% has to be kept aside, it simply means out of 100 rupees, bank B will take 10 rupees, keep it on the side, and will ensure that this money will be present if the person X doesn't repay the loans. This is basically referred as a provisioning norms. Again, it's a very complicated process. I'm just trying to simplify it. Now, remember this. The provisioning norms will be applicable to the standard assets as well as the non-performing assets. Whenever it is a standard asset, the provisioning norm as per the accounting standards will be 0.4%. 0.4% of what? 0.4% of the total value of the loan. Whereas in case of an account turning NPA, the provisioning norms will keep on increasing. Initially it will be 15%, then it will be 40%, and finally it will be increased to 100%. That is whenever the NPA is classified as a loss-making asset, which simply means that there is no way that the bank is going to recover this particular money. Usually will have a provisioning norm of 100%. What is the meaning of this? Let's say hypothetically bank B has given a loan of 100 rupees to a borrower, out of which it has recovered 20 rupees. Outstanding debt is let's say 80 rupees. If this particular account is classified as a loss-making asset, then the unpaid amount or the outstanding amount of 80% will have to be written off. So in that particular case, to write off 80 rupees, you will have to make a provision of 80 rupees on the other side. So 100% provisioning norm in case of a loss-making asset. So let's get back to this particular guidelines. Understand this. Earlier I said that this particular account has to be a standard asset. So the provisioning norm would be how much? 0.4%. Apart from having a provision of 0.4%, now RBI says there has to be an extra provision of 5%. So basically extra provision or extra cushion has to be provided by the banking sector if this particular loan is recast. So these are some of the very important provisions which have been announced under this particular MSME debt recast model. Now, what is the advantage? What are the implications of this particular debt recast? One, the MSME sector, which is under a lot of pressure as of now, will have more leeway or will get more time to repay the debt. Because please understand, I've already mentioned that the account though is a standard, but the payments already have been defaulted. Now, if the existing process is continued after 90 days, basically the bank has to declare this as NPA, drag the MSME unit to IBC. Understand this. When it is done, that is, the bank drags this particular company or unit to the NCLT, the provisioning will increase to 50%. Now, under this particular debt recast model, though there is a default in the repayment, the account is still standard and the provisioning has to be increased by only 5%. So the pressure on the banking sector will come down to declare these accounts as NPAs and make a higher provision, as well as the pressure on the MSMEs to repay the loan in the instant or sooner will also come down. They'll get more time to repay the debt. Third, whenever the banks drag these companies or units to NCLT to conduct the insolvency resolution process, the haircuts which are taken by the banks is very huge. Now the banks will also prevent this kind of a haircut. And fourth very important point from the perspective of banking sector itself, whenever the MSME units are dragged to NCLT, it has been found that the number of buyers during the insolvency resolution process is very less. And whenever there are no buyers for this particular unit, there has to be a liquidation. And whenever the liquidation is conducted, the recovery rates are very, very poor. Now, apart from this, another very important implication is, since the MSME units will not be dragged under insolvency resolution, the companies will continue to produce or perform, and more importantly, there will be no effect on the employment. So these are some of the implications with respect to this particular debt recast which has been announced. Finally, what are the issues or concerns related to this particular debt recast? One, this debt recast model basically is opposite to the stance which was taken by the RBI until very recently. The previous RBI governors, that is Mr. Raghuram Rajan or be it Mr. Urjit Patel, were basically opposed to this particular idea of a debt recast in the MSME units or MSME loans. Their argument was simple: the exposure of the banks to these particular MSME units is very high. If I go for a debt recast model, it will basically lead to covering up of these particular NPAs, which anyways will come out in the open after a couple of days. Because please understand, the MSME units are very vulnerable to the external factors. Now, when I say external factors, anything which is happening beyond these particular MSME units. For example, any change in the policy of Government of India, any change in the trade relations with, let's say, a country such as USA, any impact of a Brexit, all of these issues will affect the MSME units. So these are very vulnerable to the external factors. The second concern is that even the honest MSME owners will start defaulting on the repayment now, since there is a debt recast available, and this will basically vitiate the credit cycle. And the third concern is that the NPAs in the MSME loan segment have kept on increasing, especially the loans which have been given by the public sector banks. As per the recently published the Financial Stability Report, it states that in the month of June 2017, the NPAs within the loans which were given by the public sector banks to the MSME units accounted for around 14.5% NPAs, whereas in a span of a year, June 2018, this has increased to 15.2% of the loans which are given to MSME units. So basically, there is an increasing trend of a higher NPAs within this particular segment. So at this particular juncture, giving a debt recast may basically mask these particular accounts from becoming NPAs, but after a couple of years or after a couple of months, they will again turn out to become NPAs. So these are some of the concerns which have been raised against this particular debt recast which has been announced very recently. So this is the comprehensive analysis or the discussion related to the debt recast. Thank you. Have a good day.